So I welcome everyone to this session. My name is Shaheera Jalil Albasit. I work as a research specialist at the National Poverty Graduation Program at Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund. And we're really glad to have had this opportunity of collaborating with SDPI on this very, I think, very timely session, because the title of this panel, this session, this conversation is the urgency of placing young people at the center of Pakistan's post-COVID development agenda. I think it's never been more urgent than perhaps in a post-pandemic, in a post-COVID impacted world, to actually rethink how we've been perceiving the participation and the tokenized participation in a way of young people in Pakistan's conversations. It's been a while, and I think it's more important now because we've been always having conversations around the youth bulge, with nearly 64% of the population of Pakistan being under the age of 30. It's a historically large youth group that we've had in Pakistan. And not just young people under the age of 30, but if we speak categorically about people between the ages of 15 and 29, that also constitutes about 1/3 of the population of the country. And Pakistan has never, of course, seen such a huge surge of people between the ages of 15 and 29 as well. So I think the conversation today is going to be very timely, very specifically urgent given the circumstances we are in. And I welcome you all formally to this conversation. In the panel, we have the chair as Ms. Shandana Gulzar. I'm going to quickly give her introduction, speak about her. Ms. Shandana was elected as member of the National Assembly of Pakistan in 2018, and she was elected as the chairperson of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians for a duration of 3 years in 2019. In her capacity as the chair, she's developed the Commonwealth's first anti-harassment guidelines and a gender sensitization toolkit for the parliamentarians. Besides having served as Parliamentary Secretary for Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Ms. Shandana serves in the Parliament of the Committees on Industry, Privatization, and Defense Production. She is the convener of subcommittee of the first ever Special Committee on Agriculture, which focuses on agricultural modernization with a focus on small scale and women farmers and rural workers in particular. She's also part of the Executive Committee of the Parliamentary Task Force on SDGs. She's the convener on SDG 5 in particular, and is helping develop Pakistan's first ever constituency roadmap for each SDG. As part of the Executive Committee of Pak-Afghan Friendship Group, she leads on a number of political, peace, and commerce task forces. As an activist, Shandana has worked on economic rehabilitation of post-incarceration women and children, and providing opportunities for their families, developing training and legislation for female lawyers, as well as advising NGOs. Shandana's areas of specialization includes policy design, policy review, reform and development, legislation, and litigation at the multilateral level. Besides the chair, we have Mr. Danyal Ahmed as the first speaker. Mr. Danyal is a communications and media strategist at the Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund, PPAF. He has a master's in advertising and communications from the Bournemouth University, United Kingdom. Then we have Ms. Mehr Shah. Ms. Mehr has 18 years of experience working in the development sector. She currently leads Karandaaz, Pakistan's knowledge management and communications portfolios. She holds an MBA from Syracuse University, USA, and a BSc from the Lahore University of Management Sciences, LUMS in Pakistan. In the third speaker slot, we have Dr. Zunaira Saqib. Dr. Zunaira is founder and CEO of Pakistan's first AI-based career counseling website, Mera, Future.pk. She's also an experienced academic and HR consultant with over 15 years of experience. She has a PhD in management from the University of Leicester, UK, and master's in HRD and consulting from Lancaster University, UK. She's been teaching human resource management, employment relations, recruitment and selection, and organizational behavior courses to undergrads and postgrads since 2010 at the NUST Business School in Pakistan. Then we have Mr. Dawar Hameed Bhatt. Mr. Dawar is a public policy analyst by profession with a deep interest in environmental policy and management. He's also co-founder and organizer for Climate Action Pakistan, which is a collective of major climate and environment advocacy groups from Pakistan. He's currently the research manager at Legal Aid Society and has worked as an analyst for Sustainable World, Equilibrium Pakistan, EQM, and Center for Research on Energy and Clean Air, CREA. So I welcome you all. I welcome all the participants as well. We've got about 23 people attending this all together. And now I would formally open the floor to Mr. Danyal Ahmed to give his presentation, which is titled COVID-19 pandemic recovery, putting youth of Pakistan at the forefront. Danyal, over to you.
Thank you very much, Shaheera.
And I'm sorry, just for a quick intervention, each speaker is going to have between 12 and 15 minutes to be presenting their findings. So Daniel, please.
Thank you very much, Shaheera. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to thank SDPI and SDC committee for giving me an opportunity to join this dialogue today and represent some action research findings from PPAF's work. As many of you may be aware, Pakistan Poverty Alleviation Fund, PPAF, is the lead apex institution for community-driven development in the country and started working since the year 2000. PPAF serves the poorest and the most marginalized rural households and communities across the country, providing them with an array of financial and non-financial services. PPAF has outreach across Pakistan's 147 districts, supporting communities to access improved infrastructure, energy, health, education, livelihoods, finance, and develop resilience to disasters. I'll be speaking on my paper titled COVID-19 Pandemic Recovery, Putting Youth of Pakistan at the Forefront. Pakistan holds a prominent ranking among the youngest countries in the world. Around 64% of its population is younger than 30, and around one-third of its youth is between the ages of 15 and 29. This makes it the largest youth population Pakistan has ever had. While a lot has been said regarding urban youth, this paper draws attention to the rural youth, who are often lacking access to spaces to raise their challenges. To understand the implications of COVID-19 pandemic, PPAF commissioned a study for qualitative assessment on poor women and youth, as these two social groups were most adversely affected by the recent macroeconomic shocks. Excuse me. In total, 45 focus group discussions were conducted in 8 sample districts across Pakistan. The COVID-19's economic impact showed that youth are more prone to economic shocks as they reside closer to poverty lines, have fewer savings, have much less diversified economy, and are mostly absorbed in the unregulated informal sector. Now, to convey the findings of the study, I'm going to tell you a story. This is a story of a young woman. Her name is Fatma. She belongs to a remote rural district of Pakistan, and her father passed away because of COVID-19. Her mother was already sick. She has 2 younger siblings, a brother and a sister. The family owns a horse cart on which her father used to transport onions and potatoes from one place to another. This is the only source of income that the family has, and they have been pushed in a fight for their survival, the whole burden falling on this young woman's shoulder. Now, this young lady was restricted to do house chores for most of her life, but she is brave and possesses tenacity. She realizes that she has to take on her father's role and start earning for the family, even if it is just daily wage work, which most of the people her age do in the region she belongs to. So the first step for her to earn a livelihood for her family is to learn how to work with the horse they own. Now, if you know anything about horses, you would know that you can bring a horse to the water or a water to the or water to a horse, but in either case, you cannot force it to drink the water. But after some time, you finally figure out how to make the water available to the horse. But the horse is still not drinking it. You think to yourself, why is the horse not drinking the water? What is wrong with this horse? And then you realize that the horse was not thirsty in the first place. It was actually hungry. Now Fatma realizes this and goes to her younger brother, who is 80 years old, but used to tag along with her father sometimes while he worked. She asks him, and he tells her that the horse likes to feed first and then likes to drink water. Fatma realizes it's just better to leave both food and water in the stable, and that the horse is trained enough to know where to get them when it is thirsty or hungry. Now, it would have saved Fatma a lot of effort, time, and resources, which all resulted in her taking undue stress if she knew in the beginning that the horse liked to eat a bit first and then drink water. She thinks to herself she could have figured it out faster only if she would have gone to her brother sooner and asked him because he had the information. He starts taking the horse outside daily, but now she has to face societal issues, including harassment, constant fear about her safety and safety of her family. What will happen to her if something, what will happen to her family if something happens to her? The only source of information that he trusts are the government lady health worker that visits from time to time and the radio which is broadcasting educational programs. She thinks to herself, at least her brother and sister are learning something, and maybe they have a better future, and maybe their potential will be better utilized than her. This is what motivates her to go out daily, face even the threat of getting exposed to COVID-19 herself, and all the other fears and challenges. So she continues to earn income for her family through daily wages. Now, wouldn't it be great if she does not have to constantly worry about her family's safety and her safety? How much stress will be alleviated from her mind if she is not in a constant struggle for survival and can actually focus on building a life for herself and her family? And wouldn't it be nice that she had access to technology, a smartphone, an internet connection? She could have learned how to convert her daily income to small scale business by having access to the required information at her fingertips. The government of Pakistan is making serious efforts to address these challenges faced by the youth. The government has taken strict and efficient measures to vaccinate the country's population. 23.7% of Pakistan's total population had been fully vaccinated up until first week of December 2021. In 2019 to 20, considerable advances were made for youth skills development in Pakistan, with 0.6 million young people trained under skill development programs. Programs such as Kamyab Jawan program, Kamyab Hunarmand program. These programs are about enhancing the technical and vocational skills and providing access to affordable credit to young people to increase their entrepreneurship and employability. The number of technical institutions available countrywide increased to 3,634, with a total enrollment of youth standing around 200,000. But we will see the fruit of these investments in the years to come. Right now, the outbreak of COVID-19 in Pakistan has imposed a major challenge on the government to prepare immediate responsive action plans and strategies that are specific for the rural youth. To realize the full potential of these investments, it is important to expand access to affordable technology, smartphone, internet access to rural areas, and customize the learning courses to the needs of the local markets. To succeed on a large scale, digital skill training programs must collaborate with stakeholders across a variety of sectors, starting from the agriculture sector, as this is where currently the livelihood of most marginalized youth lies. As the world of work is changing, young people in Pakistan need to be better prepared to compete in the markets available to them in the future. In rural areas, there are macro trends that are impacting the ability to sustain viable incomes on primary production. And hence, it is vital that we now invest in training young people on innovating agriculture value chains and to be able to gain a better income from value added products from the farms. Similarly, this involves training and sensitizing them on consumer trends and marketing to urban and peri-urban areas. As Pakistan has a high rate of rural to urban migration, policies need to be geared toward enhancing young people's capacity to participate in diversified labor markets in urban areas as well. For a very long time, we have been talking about empowering youth, but our main focus should be the rural youth. They are underrepresented in policy reforms and have less access to most public services and the internet. We need to improve digital inclusion, especially for women, because they make up at least half of our young population. There are still barriers to young women and girls being allowed to own a phone, particularly in these areas. So overcoming social barriers is important for ensuring young women to have access to information for learning, education, and awareness of market opportunities. The socio-economic impact of COVID-19, high inflation, and other shocks have caused tremendous stress in poor families. There is a need to provide psychosocial support, counseling, and mentorship to young people who have also suffered depression and other mental health concerns in this crisis. Youth possesses a tremendous transformative potential, and more efforts can be made for rural young women and men, as well as youth representatives from various minorities, to not only systematically be included and consulted in all dialogues concerning the impact of COVID-19, but also in the post-pandemic decision-making processes and policy reform. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danyal, for such an insightful presentation. I think one of the key takeaways from your presentation is, the whole idea of innovating agriculture, because, at PPAF as well, the cohort we work with, they have a very specific focus on agriculture, but of late we've seen a lot of migration happening from the rural value chains to the urban value chains, which essentially kind of like make the rural value chains devoid of any chances of innovation, especially when it comes to, agricultural entrepreneurship. And that gives me a very good opportunity of, branching off to Mehr. Here, I'll bring her in, Ms. Mehr from Karandaaz, because she's been categorically working on knowledge management at Karandaaz. And, she has been kind of like specifically looking at digital finance and, the whole entrepreneurship space. And I'd like to bring her in and, ask her what she can reflect for us from her experience at Karandaaz about more or less, specific focus on what young people are, how they're evolving in terms of, SMEs, how their culture is evolving in terms of digital finance, and all of that exciting space. So Mehr, over to you. You have 12 to 15 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaheera. Good afternoon to the chair for the session, Ms. Shandana Gulzar, to all the panelists, to our moderator, to all the participants. A very good day to everyone. Shaheera, you have summed up very nicely what I'm going to be focusing on. Now, I will be using a presentation, so I can share my screen, right?
Yes, you should be able to do that. Can you give it a try?
Okay.
We can see it, yes.
You can see it?
Yes, we can.
Great. So my talk today, as the heading of my presentation shows, is going to focus on the financial inclusion of our youth. Why is it important? And what are some of the benefits from financially including our youth? Now, before I get into the specifics, I'd like to just give us a sense of the proportion of youth population when you look at it from the perspective of the global population. As per the dictionary, the meaning is the period between childhood and adult age. Now, that is defined differently in different countries, but the UN has a definition where young people are said to be between the age of 15 and 24 years of age. Taking that cohort, that demographic, the youth comprises about 16% of the global population. That's a significant number, which is why the Sustainable Development Goals assert that young people must be considered across all goals and targets aimed at sustainable development. So, reinforcing the fact that this is such a big demographic, and it is a demographic which is going to be getting into leadership, decision-making positions, they're next in line for those positions. This is a cross-cutting theme across the SDGs. Now, where is this demographic located? If we're to look at the spread of youth across different regions, we can see there are two regions where the youth population is spiking up. So that is South Asia, and it is Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, both of these regions are also known for higher levels of poverty, and that sort of has multidimensional implications. So, keeping this global perspective in mind, what is the context in Pakistan? Who are the youth in Pakistan? Now, the definition that we use is 15 to 29 years of age, which is more expansive than the UN classification of youth, but it is less expansive than several other countries that take this number up to 34 or 35, which includes countries as diverse as Switzerland, UAE, Saudi Arabia, South Africa. Now, with these different definitions, the youth in Pakistan is 56 million if we use the Pakistani definition, 40 million if we use the UN definition. Either way, it's a big proportion of our population. In recognition of this, several policies have been developed for youth in the country. Now, after the 18th Amendment, youth affairs became a provincial domain. 3 of the provinces have already got youth policies in place. One is working on them. And as is the case with youth policies globally, some of the key drivers for that policy are the economic empowerment and skills development of this segment, education, health, social empowerment, political participation, and empowerment. Now, given this focus, I'm going to be looking specifically at the economic empowerment of youth and how have we fared on this. When we take stock, looking at a country comparison, we see that Pakistan is lagging behind. So in terms of the proportion of the population that is not in employment or training or education, we're at 31%. In financial account ownership, of youth specifically, we're at 15%, which means that only 15% of Pakistan's youth is financially included. In comparison, we can look at some of the other countries in the region also. For example, Sri Lanka is 77%, Bangladesh is 41%, and some of the African countries like Kenya is as high as 76%. Literacy rates are also lower than a number of countries in the region. Now, over here, it's very important to also keep in mind that generally youth unemployment exceeds the overall rate of unemployment. We annually experience the entry of about 1.7 million youth into the job market, and this trend is going to continue until about 2040, given the fact that our population growth rate is quite high. To be able to absorb all these people into the workplace, we will need to maintain a consistent GDP growth rate of 7% annually. Now that is a figure also to keep in mind. And another factor which I found very interesting was at least 25% of the youth is engaged in unstable, low-paid employment without benefits, and 35% of them in unpaid family work. Most of them are women. So in this scenario, why is financial inclusion important? Now, what is financial inclusion? When we talk about financial inclusion, we do not just refer to access to a bank account. We refer to financial inclusion as having access to a range of services, which means a bank account, it means the ability to be able to take a loan, it means the ability to access insurance. So a range of financial services, and not just access, but to be able to use those facilities. So that is what we mean by financial inclusion. Why is the financial inclusion of young people important? Because young people all have access to money. We tend to link access to money to either being employed, but young people start receiving pocket money from very young ages. They start earning money in certain informal jobs. Then there are gifts from parents and relatives. So money is something that young people come into contact with much earlier than the age which we regard as the age of majority, which is 18 years of age. And there is also research which kind of backs the idea that financial inclusion of the youth has very useful and beneficial implications. Now, research shows that children form their financial habits as young as 7 years old. And this, second important set of findings is that a number of studies are exploring the effects of access to savings accounts and financial education by children and young people. And generally, the positive effects fall into three broad categories. The first is, of course, instilling positive financial behavior. So children or young adults start to understand the value of savings, of building assets, of wealth creation. Then there is enabling asset accumulation and improving opportunities for upward economic mobility. So when you understand what the financial service can offer, one can access those resources either to access training, improve education, etc., etc. And then fostering an ancillary effect, which means that there are educational and psychological benefits. There are benefits also of health. So these are the three broad categories in which benefits can be improved because of access to finance. Now, over here, I'm going to generally show you some of this is repeat information because we're looking at financial inclusion of youth across different regions. As we can see, it's 15% in Pakistan, but then there is also the issue of the gender gap. Now, the gender gap is 28% in Pakistan, which means 28% fewer adult women have access to financial inclusion as compared to men. So for women which fall into the youth segment, it's like a double whammy because not only are they more vulnerable, but they sort of generally fall into a category which has much lower access to finance. And the reason for including this was that if we're going to be working on youth, then we cannot ignore the gender aspect. The gender aspect has to be tackled in tandem with generally working on youth. Now, the impact of COVID, we know, has been especially hard on this demographic. According to a survey done by the UN, 40% of the youth were worried about personal and household income. 25% of the youth felt that COVID-19 has impacted their mental health. Unemployment rate for the youth between the age of 20 to 24 remained the highest even before COVID. And another important aspect to consider here is the difference which my predecessor also referred to, which is rural youth. So there is this concept of the digital divide, and if we're not careful, then we will leave behind the rural youth because of a digital divide. Now there are two opportunities from a financial inclusion perspective which can help us bridge this divide. The first is digital financial inclusion. As we know, the digital ecosystem in Pakistan has been developing, and we now have, as per the Pakistan Telecommunication Authority, about 187 million subscribers, 106 million 3G, 4G subscribers, 109 million broadband subscribers. Smartphone ownership is approximately 22%. 46 million active users. We have active social media users. Out of these 46 million, 9 million have been added only in the last year. And e-commerce is also picking up in a big way. 8% of the population makes online purchases and or pays bills online. Mobile money awareness is also high at 75%, but financial literacy is quite low at 14%. Now, the State Bank of Pakistan, as well as the Securities and Exchange Commission, have been making very concerted efforts to improve the digital financial ecosystem. The State Bank has recently launched RAST. RAST is the infrastructure that will make digital payments ubiquitous across Pakistan. It will make them low cost. It will make them real time. It will make them accessible to everybody in Pakistan.
Mehr, Yeah, Mehr, I'm sorry to be intervening. If you can wrap in like 2 minutes, that'll be great. We are at the 13-minute mark.
Sure. Okay. So, but to be able to really benefit from this aspect, the financial sector has to step up with the type of financial products and services that they're producing, as well as provide the youth with different investment options, because the youth does not have significant amounts to make investments. So investments which can be made with smaller amounts of money. And of course, along with that, we need sustained work on digital literacy, on financial literacy, and on consumer protection. Another opportunity to bridge this divide is entrepreneurship. Now, in the last 6 years, Pakistan's startups have raised over 300 million US dollars. This is more than the last 6 years combined. So our startup ecosystem is really beginning to take root. We have accelerators in the country, we have incubators, we have colleges giving entrepreneurship courses. There is government support, and sort of this rapid digital adoption is really kind of pushing forward the entrepreneurship space. And we're beginning to see businesses that are founded and led by youth raising as much as $37 million in their funding rounds. So both of these, digital financial services and entrepreneurship, really present an opportunity to engage our youth and to be able to make them productive citizens of Pakistan. Now, just my last slide is just a couple of words on Karandaaz's focus on youth. We've been focused on youth since we began operations in 2014. We are very particular about how we collect our impact data, which has been segregated for youth right from the beginning. So of the over 800,000 jobs that have been supported in the microfinance sector, about half of those, a little less than half, have been for the youth. And of the 55,000 jobs supported in the SME sector, about 28,000 have been for youth. Karandaaz has also got a gender and a youth policy. And one of our biggest interventions to enable youth is to reduce the financial digital divide in Pakistan. So I will close there, Shaheera.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Mehr. And now I'm going to bring in Dr. Zunaira Saqib. I think Meher's presentation overall was very telling in terms of how we need to actually rethink the whole concept of, first of all, the definition of youth, and then, of course, the idea of what defines financial inclusion. I think it was very telling to note that only about 15% of young people in Pakistan are actually formally financially included, and that generally youth unemployment tops the general averages of overall unemployment in the country, and that 25% of young people are in unstable employment. I think this is a very, timely opportunity to bring Zunaira and probably have her speak about, her work with human resource management and gauging the capacity of young people at this point, especially when we talk about skills development and, the idea of skills gap analysis, and specifically, like Mehr said, the ability of young people to develop skills and be more financially included, more holistically financially included when it comes to, digital literacy. So Zunaira, I'm going to bring you in, and maybe you could speak more about what's the current status quo in terms of skills of young people. Where is the gap? What are the challenges in terms of accessibility to skills development training programs, and where do we go from here, especially considering that the startup scene is really buzzing, and there's a lot of opportunities out there, but again, a very dichotomous scenario when it comes to skills of urban youth versus rural youth. So Zunaira, over to you.
Thank you, Shaheera. Am I audible? Okay. Can you hear me fine?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you for inviting me here, and it's a great opportunity to speak at this platform and to the youth and whoever is listening. I will mainly be talking about career counseling today because that's what I've been doing for the past 2 years officially, although my experience has been in human resource and university teaching and training. But today specifically, I think it would be a good point. It's a good platform to talk about career counseling for the youth. I'm the founder of Mera Future.pk, which is Pakistan's first AI-based aptitude testing company. Started this company 2 years ago. And the reason for starting this company was, I think this company or this idea should have been there a long time ago, because this is something that we have been facing for a very long time. ये वो चीज़ है जो कि हमने face की है, and then our parents have faced that, and this is something that our kids are also facing, and that is selection of a degree and selection of a career. पाकिस्तान के अंदर एक बहुत मेन इशू है, वो ये है कि कैरियर काउंसलिंग के अंदर there is no guidance. Kids don't know how to select their degrees, they don't know how to select their careers. There is just option of popular choices out there. Parents जो हैं वो बच्चों को force कर रहे हैं कि आप डॉक्टर बन जाएं या आप इंजीनियर बन जाएं, पिछले कुछ 2 decades के अंदर there is a lot of focus on business side. So business administration is a popular degree now. And now we are seeing a lot of business administration graduates in the market, but with either very poorly paid jobs or no jobs at all. So this is a problem that we've been facing for a very, very long time. And 2 years ago, when I started this company, the aim was that we are going to build something that help students, that help the youth, जो कि अपनी टीनेजेस में हैं, जो कि अपने A levels क्लियर कर रहे हैं, FSC क्लियर कर रहे हैं, इंटरमीडिएट क्लियर कर रहे हैं, उनके सामने एक पाथ रखना, उनके सामने एक इंफॉर्मेशन रखना about their own selves so they can take better career decisions. So we started with aptitude testing in Pakistan, and aptitude testing is simply something that is pretty common in developed countries, but it is not very common in Pakistan, and the data is not available locally to build a system जो कि local लोगों को एक local needs के हिसाब से guide कर सके. So we started collecting local data. We went to Pakistan's top universities. We went to the degrees that are being offered there. We talked to the graduates. And we started collecting a lot of data to build up an AI model, and eventually build up the website Mehr Future.pk, which is all about AI-based aptitude testing. And when we started the company, COVID was something that was happening in China, but it wasn't something that people in Pakistan knew would come. It was January 2020. And we started a company, and by March, the COVID frenzy has taken over everywhere basically, and schools were closing down and colleges were closing down. So the year 2020, the first year of our company, we had a lot of struggle, and the struggle was there due to multiple reasons. One, you go to schools and colleges and you try to approach individuals and you try to approach parents and you tell them that there's need of career counseling, and they don't understand what career counseling is. So in Pakistan, there is a perception that career counseling is equal to getting admissions in the university, whether that be local universities or that be universities abroad. Mostly people would think that aapko koi si har university mein agar admission karwa diya jayega, that would be career counseling. So when we would tell them about aptitude testing, especially AI-based aptitude testing, they wouldn't understand what is that product and why do you need to have aptitude testing or have more information about their own selves to take an informed decision. So there was a struggle with that, and there was a struggle of COVID, of course, because schools and colleges, they were struggling and they were closing down, they were opening, they were closing down again. So whole 2020 year went like that. However, that also opened some ways for us. So I will discuss about it in a little bit in a little time as well. But first, I will like to tell you that how is the situation in Pakistan. We went to top universities of Pakistan. When I say top universities, I mean top universities in almost every category. So with business administration, we went to LUMS, we went to IBA, we collected data from NAS, we went to data from GK, from UET, you name the university, and we were there to collect data. And if you look at these universities and you look at their entry test and you look at the applications that they receive every year, they're immense. So for example, a very huge university would receive as many as 100,000 applications for admission in the different programs. And out of 100,000 people, only 2,500 or 3,000 people will actually get admissions in those universities. So, they come through a very competitive process. And after such a competitive process, you would think that these students are there, they should be happy in their degrees, they should be very proud of themselves that they have made it this far, they are into Pakistan's top university or universities, and everything should be rosy. But that's not the real picture, because when we went out there to collect data, we found out that almost 70% people, agar main sab degrees ki aapse baat karu, students were unhappy, and they were not unhappy because the teaching is bad or because the teachers are not good or infrastructure is not good. Those are separate problems. They were unhappy because they realized after coming into those particular degrees after 2 or 3 semesters that degree is not for them. And that is very, very true for 2 professions, particularly one medicine and second is engineering. And of course, the reason is that these are the 2 professions where people are most forced. And this is a very sad state of affairs. The students are getting into degrees, they are getting into universities, they're working very hard, they are taking positions in board, they are taking straight A's in A levels, and then they are in that university and in that degree and they are unhappy. And most of them can't turn back because, of course, we are a developing country. Most of them come from middle class background. So when parents have spent 2 years, 2.5 years on them, investing in them, there is no point of even asking or having the courage to go to parents and say, this is not for me. I don't want to do this. Maybe I want to end up in social sciences, or I want to end up in fashion and design. And and I think there's very less thinking about it, that when these very students who are bright students, because एक हमारे concept ये है कि बच्चे नालायक होते हैं, तो नालायक कोई बच्चा नहीं होता, but because they are in the wrong degrees, that's not as per their aptitude. When they graduate from these degrees and they go out in the market, they were unhappy in their degree and they remain unhappy in their jobs or whatever they do. And they don't even, as Mehr was talking about entrepreneurship, so many people don't even think about entrepreneurship because obviously that's not a field for them. If I have done civil engineering, for example, I've done electrical engineering, and I absolutely hated it throughout my 4 years. I'm not going to think about starting a business within electrical engineering because obviously I don't like it. So when there is no job, I'm unemployed, I'm unhappy, I'm a burden on the economy, I feel very depressed. Parents are thinking we have invested so much and there is no return. And these are all the problems that are around us for a very, very long time, and nobody's talking about it, nobody's discussing it. And parents are forcing their kids, and teachers are taking pride, and schools are taking pride in the fact that their students are scoring straight A's or highest marks. But nobody really tracks down their progress into the university or see what actually happens to those kids. And now I go back to the point of COVID. I think, of course, COVID is a bad thing, and it really did a lot of bad things for, especially for education sector and economy and everything. But in a way, I think you have to, if you look at the positive, one of the things that COVID did was it created an existential crisis for schools and colleges. Eventually for universities as well, but my focus is schools and colleges because these are the ones that prepare them for university. And existential crisis, I mean that students are taking online classes, and parents for the first time realize that there is not really much being taught there, and our schools and college really contributing in progress and in the development of the students. And eventually when they are giving exams, everybody's scoring straight A's, and a lot of people are taking, जैसे आपने FSC के results में उसमें देखा कि 700 out of 700. So the question is is it really that's what schools and colleges responsibility is? And if we are paying such high fees at private school institutions, then and online they can learn the same thing, so are the fees really worth it? And schools and colleges, they were struggling with parents giving them fees, or saying that you should be paying fees because we have to pay the teachers and everything, but students are learning those things online, and there was not really a lot of expense on the school part, so there was a lot of existential crisis. And I think that again brings us back to the point where I think it's a positive thing that maybe for the very first time parents and students started thinking about career counseling. That are we really in the right careers? Is science really a good choice for our kid? Is arts maybe something that they would thrive more? And if the schools and colleges that we are sending them in, is padhai the only focus of it? There is no extracurricular activities, there are no focus on development, there is no focus on critical thinking. So are we really making our kids, genuinely good citizens or people who would contribute towards the economy, or are we forcing them towards a side where our parents forced us, and eventually we are doing the same for our kids? So I think that COVID is sort of, when it brought the existential crisis for educational institutions, it made parents and students think as well. And I think this is the right time for everybody to start thinking very positively about career counseling. And it is not to promote Mera Future.pk, it is just to say that if we start putting students in the right degrees, if we start actually looking at their aptitude, if we start properly guiding them, then we are genuinely focusing on the youth. Because imagine a kid who is happy in their degree, who are happy doing what they're doing. So when they graduate, even if they don't find a job, so as Mehr was saying, there's a lot of opportunities in entrepreneurship out there. They are likely to become job creators, if not job seekers. So, if they don't end up finding the job, you won't have a lot of youth complaining that there are no jobs out there, because they are eventually creating the jobs for other people. But that is only going to happen when they are in the degrees, when they are the careers that they're happy about. So I think that I will conclude it here that, parents and students and schools and colleges and eventually universities have to think about these things, and they have to start thinking of making students in their putting students in the degrees where they thrive, and not just thinking about making money, or thinking that if the student is studying 8 hours in a day, they are going to become Einstein, because they are not. That's what we are seeing with the youth in Pakistan. And I think this is the right time to think about these opportunities. This is the right time to put focus on the youth, and hopefully things are going to get better in the next 1 decade or so. Thank you. I will conclude my talk here.
Thank you so much, Dr. Zunaira, for that. I think your conversation really gave us a lot of food for thought in terms of how specifically COVID. I think this was long overdue. This whole conversation around rethinking, how holistic or not holistic the career dimensions are within Pakistan, especially the global South, I would say. This conversation was long overdue, but I think COVID has really amped up and expedited the urgency of it. And just anecdotally speaking, I was speaking to a lot of young parents, especially millennials who've just recently become parents. They're really rethinking the idea of schooling altogether. So they're really drawn towards homeschooling because that gives them a lot of hands-on opportunity of being very much in touch with what goes around their child, and how they're actually brought up in a world where things are very different perhaps from what they were 20 years ago, 20, 30 years ago. And that again is a good opportunity of me getting towards Mr. Dawar here, because Dawar, you've been working on climate action in Pakistan. And I think that really ties very, very smartly with the title of this conversation, which is the urgency of placing young people at the center, and I would say at the front and the center of Pakistan's post-COVID development agenda. I think drawing from what Danyal mentioned at the very beginning, the research study that we did at PPAF really found that nearly 37% of households which were employed in daily wage employment, so daily wage labor, they were very highly vulnerable to changes due to the climate emergency. I wouldn't even call it the crisis, it's more of an emergency now. But despite that vulnerability, despite such a significant vulnerability of nearly 37% households, when we went around to these rural households and we asked them how urgent do you think is the whole climate emergency for you or your family, they were like, it's not really super urgent. So maybe you can speak about how, first of all, there is this gap of I'm not sure if awareness is a very smart word, but then what is this gap of rural households and urban households not really being able to gauge the urgency of climate crisis? And maybe you can also speak a bit more, taking on from Zunaira's presentation, about how value chains are really emerging and evolving as a consequence of climate crisis. What's really happening as a consequence of that? And what are the emerging fields, or maybe how young people are thinking differently about where they want to be 10 years down the line, considering how vulnerable the planet now is. Dawar.
Thank you so much for having me, Shaheera. And to start off, I'd say that a lot of the work that I've seen presented in this talk right now, what Daniel said, and then very insightful data from Mehr, and of course, Zunaira talked about how to get the next generation ready. A lot of these things link back to the stuff that we think on a daily basis, because by profession, I'm a public policy analyst. But at the very core of it, all the work that we do, it has to have a purpose, and it needs to reach a certain point. It needs to be connected to a goal. Now, whenever I think about myself, I'm nearing 30 years, and I think the life expectancy in Pakistan, since we've been kids, is studying Pakistan studies and social studies, it's been remained somewhat around 65, 67. So I'd say that I'm nearly at the halfway mark already. And what happens when I consider, for example, if I decide to have kids and I've had a good career, understand the issues and all of it, it's in place and I've planned for the future. But what happens when they're touching their 30-year mark, when they're nearing their half of their lives? So this drives a certain sense of urgency for me personally. And for people that we interact with, for a lot of experienced activists who I've learned from, we got together back in 2018, and this was primarily coming out of a certain urgency that we were already experiencing in Lahore, but also in other cities that we're continuously hearing that there's problem with water quality in Karachi. There is growing areas. There is a sense of, in Islamabad, you keep on hearing that there's a sudden increase in urbanization. And in Lahore, you have the massive air pollution issue. And we were still urban-based, experienced people, and we didn't have the rural expertise either. So we got together, things we were talking about, all of us were somehow connected to fossil fuels, somehow connected to bad planning. And at very least, we saw that among the people that we were talking to, the youth was the most, the youth people coming from schools like A-levels, matric, FSC, these were the students that had the most realization of these issues. It might be due to media, it might be that the curriculum has gradually evolved in a way that they realize more of the environmental impact. But at this point, we decided that we need to take a step back and let's have the kids come out and speak their minds. And I'll start sharing my screen a little bit. And there are two images that I want to share particularly. And these are students from schools in Lahore. And we wanted them to be at the forefront of any protest, any march. We had about 2,000 students participate in this and came from very, very different backgrounds. I'd say these were, you had Boy Scouts from government schools joining the same march as you had kids from very high-end private schools. And their messaging, their demands, their understanding of the issue was very different. We talk in technical terms, we talk in particulate matter, we talk in CO2 emissions. Their understanding was very simple. This cannot go on. And if it goes on, it's probably that all of us can't be in the same planet as it's happening. So this realization, and of course, when we organized this 2019, just a year after we were all in the lockdown, and we were in a once-in-a-century pandemic, which is in fact linked to, again, environmental and climate issues. It could not have been possible that a virus that, a novel coronavirus that did not exist certainly was born. And a lot of the research shows that deforestation, closer contact between humans and biodiversity is increasing these risks. And at least the new reports that we see, they say that it might not be a once-in-a-century event anymore. We might have two such viruses, we might have three such viruses, all going back to increasing temperatures and pollution and environmental degradation. So it had to be sort of put at the forefront. We have to set the stage for a generation which is going to experience this more and more, and they have to be more, they have to be a part of decision making. They have to be a part of our politics. The youth especially has been a very apolitical actor in Pakistan because the goals that they're aligned with generally don't match with their own future understanding of this country. So we decided that as people from cities, at least get these students together. And at the same time, we were having these climate marches in very, very smaller towns. We were having this in Bagh in Azad Kashmir. We were having this in Mardan, Mianwali, Sakhar, Bahawalpur. We were having these multiple marches on the same day. And students, primarily students, were out. So what do we demand? And I want to connect this back to the lot of things that speakers have already said. The primary demand is, Shaheera, you also said that we're in climate emergency, but there isn't enough recognition. This was the first demand in our manifesto, that we as a country which is most vulnerable to climate catastrophe, we have to declare a climate emergency. And each of our policy actions, each of our, I'd say all of federal government's divisions, every provincial ministry should be cognizant of the fact that whatever they put out as an intervention or policy decision, it should be it should recognize that the things that we do on a daily basis, the sort of economic incentives we give, the sort of policies that drive the behavior of the public, they will have a climate impact, and how are we making it more sustainable? Now, When we say climate emergency, people say, a lot of people came forward that what does it mean to have a climate emergency, and in practical terms, what do you want? Number one, of course, kids have their different ideas, but we also want to guide them in a way that is contextual to Pakistan. So we told them that Pakistan has a National Climate Change Council. It has not been convened. It has not been convened since it was created after the 18th Amendment. Once and again, there's no representation of youth in the National Climate Change Council. Again, there's their provincial climate environmental protection councils, no representation for youth. So these are the agenda items that we started giving them, because you have to understand where this policy driving actors, the kids especially. Whenever I say kids, I'm basically talking about anyone who is under the age of 24, who might still be in university, college, school, anywhere. Or of course, we have children who are out of school as well. Even their voices matter. So you have to put them in the agenda which addresses their issues and concerns. And of course, as people who are more experts who are linked to environment climate, they guide these actions, they present them the evidence to make the decision making on. The next agenda item, it was sort of what we link back to sort of actions that have to be driven here. And it was, in my back, there's the azan going on, but I'll continue on. People can still hear me. We wanted that the economy should move towards a more sustainable model. And as a sustainability expert myself, there are a lot of things in Pakistan on a daily basis that I myself do are not very sustainable actions. I still have to drive to work. There's no public transport. I still have to consume water in a way, because water in particular cities is being sucked up from the ground. We shouldn't be taking out groundwater with a limitless approach. So there are certain actions that I have to do because the government has not provided me an alternative which is more sustainable. And our children are very cognizant of this issue as well. Moving on, the further demand we had was that the climate change policy needs to be renewed. It was made in 2016. We've tried to summarize it into digestible bits for students, and again, they realize what new actions have to be added. And the pandemic diseases is an agenda that was not included in this policy. So you have newer areas that need to be included, and you have to get the stakeholders on board who understand this. We also, I've already mentioned that convening the National Climate Council should be the first step to do all of this, and it should be inclusive of people from youth. And this was something that is being experienced in all Pakistani cities right now. Lahore has a big air pollution issue, but all the other cities, Multan, Faisalabad, Karachi, Peshawar, Islamabad, Rawalpindi, you cannot see what beyond your radius of 2 kilometers, and this is not normal. As children, we saw our cities very clear with blue skies. If you were in Islamabad, you could see the Marglas. If you were in Sialkot, you could see the mountains of Kashmir. And if you were in Lahore, you could see blue skies where you used to fly kites. So a lot of these things we want, the demands that we link back to is what sort of future we want. And future is going to be for people who are young right now. So what happens when they don't have a voice? At this point, we wanted them to have a voice. And as you've already mentioned, that what sort of, as a goal, as a personal objective, the children now, for example, some of them, people who joined us, maybe 2,000, 3,000, if you combine Karachi, Islamabad, Lahore, other smaller towns, maybe it will be an audience of up to 5,000 to 6,000 students. They realize they joined us, they probably needed permissions from their parents, but there might be other kids. So if you collectively want to say something that people who are really, really concerned, youth within Pakistan, it would be somewhere around 50 to 60,000. People are really, really concerned and also understanding. Concern and understanding is a little bit different. Now, what can they do? Already something that I think already Daniel was pointing at, and Shaheera, you pointed at, Dr. Zunaira was pointing at. that what are the sort of understanding that we need to now create, or the skills that we need to institute into our kids, and what can they do beyond their own education that might be limited, or what they do in their universities. Now, I was in another panel which was talking about the Kamyab Jawan program, and one of the speakers had a very interesting idea that you're going to give out these loans to students from different universities. Why not align 30% of these loans into projects that will only be looking at sustainable products and sustainable manufacturing and other sustainable services? You can simply incentivize the youth who don't even need degrees in, as a matter of fact, for working to a particular business model. So you are going to, if you align 30 to 40% of the loans that you're going to give out, the entire business chain or value chain that is going to be behind these businesses will become sustainable. It will drive, for example, if you're going to agriculture, it will drive your regenerative agriculture models. It will drive organic agriculture. It will drive vertical farming. If you go towards your air quality industry, people will be working on EVs, people are working on battery technology. So you're going to be both arming students with opportunities, a young youth with opportunities, but you're also going to be economically benefiting the country in a way that will make sure that its economic development is sort of linked to what sustainability we want. And there are further, if we had more time, we'd go on and on about this. But the fact here is that our current understanding of climate and environment is weak, and we need to further educate and make sure that when we're educating, it is with the agenda that the young youth that we want to learn from us, or who are already well informed, they also have a seat on the table whenever it comes to making environmental and climate change policies. And this in general is what the agenda of climate action was. So that is it from me, and I, of course, will be available for any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dawar. And I think I remember you mentioned in perhaps one of your interviews or conversations that every generation has its own one challenge which is very existential to that generation. I think climate emergency is that for the millennials and the Gen Zs. And now with all the presentations done, I think we can open the floor for questions. But I think my first question will be for you, Dawar, as well. And I think when we bring in the chair, Ms. Shandana, she can speak perhaps a bit more about what are the challenges when it comes to advocacy with the parliamentarians. But right now, probably the first question will be to you, Dawar, that Climate Action Pakistan is very youth-led initiative. So when these young people, and of course the title of this conversation is the urgency of placing young people at the center, when young people reach out to parliamentarians regarding advocacy, regarding conveying to them how urgent this crisis is, what are the challenges? Are the challenges age specific? Have you ever encountered, since you've mentioned repeatedly the necessity of giving youth a seat at the table, you mentioned about the National Climate Council, which has no representation of young people. Do you think one of the main challenges when you go to these parliamentarians is that, there are no young people out there within the chambers of power and decision-making, policy-making? And is that why you think there is some reluctance in taking this conversation forward? And that also ties with second question we've received from Ms. Aisha Salma at PPAF, that, how do you think the situation of advocacy, perhaps on climate emergency, how does this compare with the situation in other comparable middle-income countries, which we can look at?
So Shreya, a very interesting question. I already read this one. And as a matter of fact, while we're speaking in the Indian Parliament, the current session that is being held is completely dedicated to climate change and climate emergency. The Pakistani Parliament has never had a session on climate change. It has different occasions and questioning. You have question hours, when you have question hour, people can ask questions related to it, but we've never had an entire session dedicated to climate change. And India is currently speaking about it. It has, of course, their democracy has their own issues and limitations. Our democracy has its own limitations. But anyone who is in parliament right now, even in Pakistan, I'd say that it should be very, very important that they have an understanding of where Pakistan stands in a climate change risk index, where Pakistan stands as an environmentally vulnerable country. And every region in Pakistan has its own issues. And when we talk about policies or debates, what's happened in Pakistan is that we've very recently, I like recently talking about not understanding on politics or democracy, that we got our devolution about 10 years back, and it has still taken us 10 years to get the provinces on board with a lot of things. So provincial capacity is limited, but the policy making still has to come from somewhere. I'd say in this situation, we need the Senate and the National Assembly to be coming forward again and again. We need to recognize that each party should be including climate change, environment. Our ruling party does it. I'd say that this is an opportunity for the others to be in competition with them and bring voices. And when you start going about doing consultations, you realize that there are people who are interested to help out these political parties. There's not like help isn't available. So it doesn't need to be someone with a family political background to be talking about it, to get a seat and get into it. It could be someone who is coming from the sort of their student wings, but might have an environmental science degree. They give them a voice. Within it has to start from the political parties, and eventually we'll see more and more actors who reach the voices in the parliament. When you talked about access to parliamentarians, now this is a tricky bit. When I look at myself, I'm very honest, I am a privileged citizen of Pakistan. I know where I stand. I recognize my privileges, and someone who is also who's lived in the big cities is connected to non-profits and your bureaucrats. So I know I can get my message to someone somehow. But you're right that whenever you take it to someone who is in a position of power, especially someone who might be coming from a rural background, might not have the same privilege, their voices will not be as loud. So at that point, I think collectives like ours will have to step forward and make more and more inclusive. And I'll give you an example of this. While we were doing field work before, while organizing a climate march, we were going to the outskirts of a lot of our cities, Karachi, Lahore, especially because we know that there are certain industrial clusters around these cities. And with those industrial clusters, you have populations that live in Kachri Abadis. Now, a lot of these Kachri Abadis don't have water access. And the primary issue that we had was that the water that was seeping into the ground was dirty industrial effluent. So the children were sort of having different diseases over and over again. Now, during the climate march, we invited all of those laborers and those children, and they were part of those marches, and we made it a point to be included in our manifesto. So it is a learning exercise for us as well, but we want to give them more and more voices.
All right, thank you. Thank you so much, Dawar. Just a quick note here. So we have some 20 minutes left in this session. And I really am itching to go to the chair, Ms. Shandana, because I'd be really interested in, hearing her speak. But just before we do that, because Ms. Mehr Shah has to leave at 1:30, I just want to, because I really want to, take stock of what Ms. Mehr has and then go to Ms. Shandana. Mehr, can you speak perhaps a bit more about, again, this question Ms. Aisha Salma has about the comparability of, lessons and challenges that we in Pakistan can have with other middle-income countries, and also categorically perhaps speak about, since you spoke about financial inclusion, how can we actually go about incentivizing rural youth and urban youth in terms of their increasing their accessibility to trainings and digital literacy and financial inclusion altogether. So how do we go about incentivizing that, and what lessons and what comparable examples do we have from other countries? Mehr.
Shaheera. So yes, with youth, we have, with the rural youth specifically, we have a significant challenge. One item I'd like to, one thing I'd like to put out there is the amount of findings on how social media and how online engagement is very different for for advantaged and disadvantaged youth. So while advantaged youth will take, sort of leverage the resource much better, for disadvantaged youth, not only does digital make them more vulnerable, but digital, if there isn't a strong enough consumer protection framework, then not only does it make the youth more vulnerable, but also they're not able to benefit from this resource the way they should be able to. So I think a very important aspect is going to be digital literacy. And we've got several examples all over the world on digital literacy. Our own central bank has also started working on digital literacy. From working with children in schools, they have developed certain games. They also have lectures and modules on generally what is the financial world about, what is money, kind of familiarizing them with these aspects. Japan did this in its schools, and they have one of the highest saving to GDP ratios in the world. So, there are a lot of examples to learn from on the digitization front, but I think we also need to be very cognizant about the fact that without strong consumer protection frameworks out there, then the vulnerable segment of the youth population can become more vulnerable. So it's very important to work on financial literacy, on digital literacy, and on consumer protection frameworks. Is there a part of your question that I have not responded to?
No, I think you've sufficiently given a very holistic response. And I think, yes, there are a lot of takeaways from what you said. Now is a great opportunity, perhaps, to bring in Ms. Shandana Gulzar. I've really been wanting to, hear her thoughts. And of course, we've all been waiting to hear from her. Ms. Shandana, you've got, at the very beginning of this session, I gave your introduction. Of course, we see that you've worked across sectors, across stakeholders, and across years. And I think this conversation becomes very well placed in terms of, hearing your thoughts. If you could categorically perhaps speak about what Dawar spoke about, the challenges of representation of young people in the parliament in terms of climate emergency. Perhaps you could speak more about what Zunaira and Ms. Mehr and Danyal all spoke about, the challenges to youth, innovations in youth-specific livelihoods in a post-pandemic and in a climate emergency-specific world, and how perhaps public-private partnerships and innovations of different kinds, bringing a lot of stakeholders together, can facilitate us in diluting or neutralizing these challenges. So,
thank you, Shaheera. I saw a lot of friendly faces today, a lot of friends, and I'm wondering, the Mehr Shah from Karandaaz, is this my friend Mehr Shah? Because if it is, she's looking very different on camera than she does in real life. So, anyways,
yes, it is me.
Okay, you look very different, Mehr. Bibi, good on you. I was struggling to figure this out. So, anyways, pleasure to see you. Somebody I respect, somebody I hold in high regard, and somebody I've worked with in Switzerland when I was working there. Now, I have a question. Unfortunately, you've chosen a politician / parliamentarian to talk about how she sees you putting youth at the center of our future economic agenda, leaving no one behind, which is the SDGs. In addition, this is the background of COVID. So you will allow me a little bit of freedom to speak my mind. I don't expect anyone to agree with me. And I understand SDPI is apolitical, but unfortunately, I said this many, many weeks ago. There's no such thing as an apolitical economic or political decision. Everything will impact young people around us. I don't know how much time I have. So, as I was saying earlier, since we're talking about the political landscape, the future of youth in this country, in Parliament in particular, I know that, Shaheera, you're working very hard to ensure that we do have representative youth population in Parliament. But I'll tell you some of the problems. The first problem is the country we live in and the structure we've inherited. And this is not just about PTI. I can assure you, I don't know what happens to PTI in another 5 years' time. So right now I do have the luxury of being giving a morally superior lecture. Again, time will tell whether my words stand true or not. But if you have in this country, only two people who are fit to run. You know who I'm talking about, two of our main prominent political parties, the son of an ex-prime minister, the daughter of an ex-prime minister, and you feel that out of 342 parliamentarians at present, thousands of politicians in Pakistan, young talent people like you, like Mehr, like Danyal, like Dawar Saab, if only two young people from two prominent families, regardless of the sacrifices their parents have made in the development of this country, if you feel you're going to hand down democracy from generation to generation, and you're going to hand down a political seat, and I've said this before, if Pakistan's army chief, his son becomes the next army chief, it's one thing if he becomes a soldier, or a doctor's son becomes a doctor, or an engineer's son becomes an engineer or a daughter. But if you're going to hand over this country to your children because you think you brought them up well, which I don't dispute, or that you taught them politics from an early age, which I do not dispute. But if the order of the merit is going to be placed simply in your bloodlines, then I'm afraid this country is lost forever. I can assure you. And I'm not just talking about two of the main political parties, the smaller ones too, QWP, ANP, JUIF, everyone is, and now TLP. So if the idea is that democracy runs in blood, then the country's had it. That is my first political point. And as I said, at this point, PTI doesn't seem to be plagued by it. We do have two families that are more prominent in parliament in PTI who have this family thing going on. And I don't approve, nor am I representative of that. But if in 5 years' time, PTI goes the same way, then I'm afraid I don't have very good news for the country. So that is one thing. A bit depressing, but it's a reality check. My brother has remained in one of these family-oriented political parties, and we've had first-hand experience of how the country is never at the center of decision-making, nor is youth. I personally have an admiration for Bilawal Zardari Sahib because he's a young, educated man. His heart seems to be in the right place, and I pray that someday he does form at some point the center of Pakistan's government. But for that to happen, he will have to have an independence of opinion. Now, that is my very opinionated opinion, but I did warn you at the beginning. Now, coming to what my colleagues just said, if we are to place youth at the center of Pakistan, your finance ministries, both at the provincial level, the AGK and GB legislative assemblies, and your center, your federal government, they will have to have in the planning and development ministries two things that are not there yet, and they are very dear to my heart. One, I work on these at the SDG Secretariat as a convener for SDG 5. You know how we make a PC1, right? In planning and development, every time you're to execute a project, you have a project document called a PC1. You have it in provinces, you have it at the center. You have something called PC5 and PC6, which are supposed to be monitoring the project itself, the end users, and why and how the money was spent. That project document, you've never seen that in Pakistan because people are terrified of actually owning up to the mistakes they made in allocation and spending of the money. And you can open up any document in the last 74 years and you'll see a disaster in public sector spending, whether in provinces and the center. Now, unless you have a project planning document where the government of the time is answerable to the people where they spent their money. Did you spend money on projects that would impact the youth? Did you spend your money on projects that would impact young women? Did you empower them? Did you disempower them? Whatever projects that you were making, roads, hospitals, or schools, irrelevant. Where did you make those schools? Did you have a youth population there? Did you have a significant women population giving birth where you made a hospital, young girls? If you don't do that, then no matter how much money you spend, youth is never going to be at the center. Now, you're a country, as Mehr very ably explained, that has a youth bulge, whether it's 40%, 70%, 50%. That's a lot of young people. And are you caring for them? Now, this government's two flagship programs, if I were to say it myself, probably would sound like just me pandering to my own party's politics. But Hafiz Pasha Saab is somebody who is not from PTI, somebody who I respect immensely and who criticizes us day in, day out on our economic policies. But the only two things he praises of PTI are the Ehsaas program and the Kamyab Jawan program. And now, of course, the third one, which is following soon, which is the Kamyab Pakistan. My only concern is that if PTI government doesn't come back, would these be carried on? And I hope to God, like the BISP, they will be carried on. But I can tell you, we can talk endlessly about the impact of policies on youth and how you put them at the center. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, you do recall Mr. Bill Clinton, who said this once, and it's not a very polite sentence, but he said it, I didn't, so I can easily repeat it. He said, it's the economy, stupid. So if nobody gets that, and if my government doesn't get it, then that line is going to apply to us. And if other governments don't get it, it's going to apply to them. It's all about the money and where you allocate the resources. There's no such thing as an apolitical economic decision. If you're going to make Pakistan's rich richer, shrink the middle class, and destroy the poor, you've done what you came to do. There are no mistakes in these kinds of decision making. So all I'm saying is what the government is doing seem to be headed in the right direction where SAS is concerned and where Kamyab Jawan. However, I can complain to you about one thing that is happening in KP government, PTI, both center and KP. And because I'm from KP, I have the freedom to criticize, because KP government, for example, we've put women's development under the social welfare department. Now, for God's sake, if you want women and girls in particular development, you don't put it in the social department, social welfare. In contrast, Sindh is doing much better. Since Women Welfare Department, they may not be delivering much, but at least their organization is better. They've got a law which talks about women not getting married before the age of 18, which impacts economic decision-making of families. So I'll be fair when I criticize, but I can tell you this, that no government in Pakistan till date, except, and this is the tragic part of it, that the only time in Pakistan you had inclusive development and inclusive decision making was not in a democratic government. It was a time of President Ayub from 1960 to 70, where you saw Balochistan rising and KP rising. Now that is a tragedy of the commons, that only when you have an unelected and unrepresentative government is when they decide for the people, by the people, and of the people. So, here we have, this is where our dichotomies end and begin. The only times in Pakistan where you've had representative local government body elections and military times. So I don't say we throw out the baby with the bathwater, and I don't intend to villainize everyone, but I do intend to speak the truth. There are no untouchables, there are no gods, and there are no political parties that are representative truly of democracy. We have to work on that. My own government is plagued by endless advisors who are not answerable to anyone. And that is what happens when you don't have representative political parties, representative political systems, representative governments. So what is the answer to that question? When will we see more young people in parliament? My guess is for the next 5 to 10 years, you'll see more young children of young, older political people bringing their children forward, daughters and girls. That's fine too. I'd prefer it if you see more girls of fathers, more daughters. I love Benazir Bhutto, I make no bones about it. Regardless of the corruption that tainted her tenure, she was, and at least to all the men present, I don't intend to offend you, but Benazir was 10 times a man than her father was. And we always respect her. She never complained. The kind of trauma she went through as a young woman, she never advertised it in any book. She never complained. In some sense, she was the Pakka English woman when she said never complain and never explain. Of course, she made mistakes, but yet she showed us what you can do when you have a woman at the center. Now, I understand we're talking about youth, but she was one of the youngest prime ministers of this country, 35 years old, the first woman in the world to give birth while in office. So let's not exclude her. And I think one of the problems we have in this country that when we talk about women in power or youth in power, we tend to fixate on a few people. Let's not do that. You have Mohsen Dawar. You have Raza Rabbani Khar, from 2 different positions and backgrounds. Both are my friends, both from opposition, neither from my party. You have Shahid Khattak, who had no money and he still made it. You have Murad Saeed, who had no money. He's a victim of the war on terror in Swat. So let's celebrate our young, regardless of what party they come to and come from, and let's focus on our commonalities. And if we can do this in parliament, and I can show you we can, and we will, inshallah, let's do it for all of Pakistan. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Shandana. I think, again, a very, very insightful closing remarks. Before anyone leaves and before we actually conclude the session, I would request everyone to open their cameras, please, so we can have a group picture. Dawar, Ahmed, and I think I'm assuming Mehr has left. Can everyone kindly switch their cameras on, please? Dawar, if you can hear us. All right, I think we're good to go in 3, 2, 1. done. Thank you for the picture. And I think, Ms. Shandana, really reflecting on what you said, I think perhaps if I'm not mistaken, if I got it right, you spoke about the political nuances, political dichotomies, and political red taping, and how there's so much at stake. The more things change, the less they do. But moving forward, we're in 2022 almost, and in about 18 years from now, the population of young people in Pakistan will soar up to 150 million people. And I think that's a very historic number in terms of, we've never had this many young people. And of course, with that comes a lot of challenges, which we again at PPAF, of course, really look at almost every day when we go into these rural communities, when we sit down with the poorest of the households in Pakistan and really try to understand what their challenges, which are very, very intersectional, very cross-sectoral challenges are. But again, the challenges differ when it comes to the urban youth. And with so much changing on the front of the startups, on the front of innovation, on the front of digital literacy, on the front of financial inclusion, I think Pakistan does have a lot of potential in terms of how young people can be included, but the challenges remain at the very grassroots, especially in the most rural communities, when we think about the accessibility of young people to these very new and emerging opportunities of livelihood. So yes, there are a lot of political challenges and there are a lot of bureaucratic challenges, even in an organization like ours. But then we intend to be moving forward, and we hope that in the next decade or so, we really are able to navigate all the political bureaucratic dichotomies and be able to actually put young people, as the title of this conversation is, at the front and the center of Pakistan's post-COVID development agenda. I thank everyone for their participation. It was a very, very insightful, a very telling conversation. Thank you for your time, everyone. Thank you.